I was the maid at my sister's wedding, until I bought the venue. She couldn't afford. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't served hot. It's served with a smile, a check, and the keys to everything your family thought you'd never deserve. They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood has been poisoned by decades of favoritism? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, treated like the help while watching someone else live the life you were denied. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 32 years old, and I live in a penthouse overlooking Camden Point's harbor, though my family doesn't know that yet. For 28 years, I lived in their shadow, in their spare rooms, in the spaces they carved out for me like an afterthought. They saw me as the reliable one, the practical one, the one who would always be there to pick up the pieces when their golden child inevitably shattered something beautiful. They never saw me coming. I suppose I should start with Vanessa. Though, even saying her name leaves a bitter taste that no amount of expensive wine can wash away. Vanessa is my half-sister, 3 years younger. Born to our father's second wife after my mother died in complications during my birth. A fact that hung over my childhood, like storm clouds that never quite broke. Our father, Marcus, remarried when I was 4, and suddenly I went from being his entire world to being the reminder of what he'd lost. Helena, my stepmother, never said she resented me outright. She was far too sophisticated for such crude honesty. Instead, she perfected the art of benign neglect wrapped in concern. "Poor Nora," she'd say to her friends at dinner parties I was expected to help serve. "She tries so hard, but she's just not blessed with Vanessa's natural gifts." The words would float across the dining room of our Millbrook Heights estate, like poison disguised as perfume. Vanessa was everything I wasn't allowed to be. Beautiful in that effortless way that makes photographers weep, charming enough to make strangers empty their wallets, intelligent enough to coast through Barristan Prep without ever truly trying. While I spent summers working at the local bookstore to save for college, she spent them in Europe, finding herself, with Daddy's credit card as her compass. But intelligence and charm don't pay the bills, and by the time Vanessa turned 25, her trust fund had been burned through like tissue paper in a wildfire. The art degree from an expensive college nobody had heard of hadn't translated into anything resembling a career. The Instagram followers didn't convert to actual income. The wealthy boyfriends kept running when they realized she was more expensive than she was profitable. Meanwhile, I had quietly built something extraordinary. It started in college, actually. While Vanessa was learning to paint watercolor sunsets that would never hang in galleries, I was studying computer science and business, paying my own way through student loans and part-time jobs that kept me busy enough to avoid going home for holidays. I learned to code not because I loved it, but because it was practical, because it was a skill that could translate into independence. After graduation, I moved to Camden Point and got a job at a small tech startup. Nothing glamorous. Debugging software, writing documentation, fixing other people's mistakes. But I watched, and I learned, and when the company folded after 2 years, I had enough experience to freelance. Freelancing led to consulting. Consulting led to contracts with bigger companies. Bigger companies led to the kind of money that makes you realize just how expensive your family's lifestyle actually was. By the time I was 28, I had developed a proprietary software system for inventory management that several major retailers were desperate to license. By 30, I had sold that system for more money than my family spent in 5 years. By 31, my investment portfolio was generating more passive income than my father's architecture firm brought in, annually, and they had no idea. I kept living in my modest apartment in East Briar, driving my reliable Honda, wearing clothes from Target, not because I had to, but because invisibility had become my superpower. While they assumed I was still struggling to make ends meet, I was quietly acquiring assets, building wealth, creating the kind of security that old money families like. Ours pretend they have but rarely actually possess. The wedding planning started 18 months ago. Vanessa had finally landed someone, Trevor Blackwood, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels throughout the Northeast. Not love, obviously, but strategy wrapped in white tulle and Swarovski crystals. Trevor was handsome in that bland, inoffensive way that screams trust fund baby, and just dim enough to believe that Vanessa's sparkling personality was worth the inevitable drain on his inheritance. Helena threw herself into planning with the fervor of a woman who saw this as her masterpiece, her chance to prove that she had raised a daughter worthy of the society pages. The budget was astronomical, easily 6 figures for a single day, money they didn't actually have but were betting on Trevor's family to provide. That's when they remembered I existed. "Nora, darling," Helena said during one of our increasingly frequent family meetings held in the sunroom of their mortgage-to-the-hilt estate. "We need to discuss your role in the wedding." I looked up from my laptop, where I had been reviewing quarterly reports from my investment accounts. My role? Well, your family, of course, but... She gestured vaguely, her diamond bracelet catching the afternoon light. "Vanessa has so many close friends from her sorority, from her art classes, from her social circles. We thought perhaps you might prefer a more supportive role." Vanessa, who had been scrolling through her phone while occasionally gasping at photos of impossible dresses, finally looked up. "We need someone reliable, Nora. Someone who can handle the details, make sure everything runs smoothly. You're so good at that kind of thing." "What kind of thing?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "Organization, logistics, the practical stuff." She said it like practicality was a mild form of leprosy. "I mean, you could still be in the wedding party, but maybe as more of a coordinator, making sure everyone has their flowers, helping with my dress, keeping track of the timeline. A maid. They wanted me to be the maid at my sister's wedding." I closed my laptop and looked at the 3 of them, my father nodding along like this was perfectly reasonable, Helena radiating that particular brand of passive-aggressive satisfaction she'd perfected over the years, and Vanessa already back to her phone, dismissing me now that she'd gotten what she wanted. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to help." The relief on their faces was almost comical. Helena actually clapped her hands together like I was a golden retriever who had successfully fetched her slippers. "Wonderful. And Nora, perhaps you could also help with some of the financial aspects? Nothing major, of course, just, well, weddings are so expensive, and your father's business has been a bit slow lately." There it was, the real reason for this conversation. They didn't just want me to be their servant for the day. They wanted me to pay for the privilege. "How much do you need?" I asked. Helena's smile became somehow both grateful and condescending. "Well, we were hoping for perhaps 20,000, just to cover some of the extras. The flowers, the photographer, maybe help with the venue deposit. $20,000. To them, it was a desperate Hail Mary, a last-ditch attempt to fund their fantasy. To me, it was what I spent on wine in a particularly good month. "I'll need to check my accounts," I said. "But I think I can manage something." Over the next 6 months, I became intimately acquainted with every detail of Vanessa's dream wedding. The venue was Millbrook Manor, a stunning 19th century estate that had been converted into the most exclusive wedding destination in the tri-state area. The kind of place that required a 2-year waiting list and a deposit that could buy a decent house. I coordinated with florists who spoke about peonies like they were discussing rare gemstones. I liaised with caterers who treated each canapé like a small work of art. I scheduled dress fittings and cake tastings and meetings with photographers who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. And slowly, quietly, I began to understand something that my family had never bothered to learn. Every business has pressure points, every empire has cracks, and every dream can be purchased if you know the right price. Millbrook Manor, for all its grandeur and exclusivity, was struggling. The pandemic had devastated the event industry, and while they were recovering, cash flow was still tight. The owners, an elderly couple named Harrison, were considering selling to a hotel chain that wanted to convert it into a standard conference center. The florist Vanessa had fallen in love with was being sued by her business partner, and desperately, needed an investor to buy out the other party's share. The photographer was behind on his taxes and facing penalties that could shut him down. The caterer was family-owned, third generation, and drowning in debt from expanding too quickly. One by one, I began to make investments. Not as Nora Whitfield, Helena's forgotten stepdaughter, but through my LLC, Betrayal Holdings. Anonymous investments, silent partnerships, strategic acquisitions that looked like business opportunities rather than a coordinated campaign. I bought the florist's business partner out for 3 times what the lawsuit would have cost her, securing not just her loyalty, but a 20% stake in her company. I paid the photographer's tax debt in exchange for exclusive access to his services for corporate events, a deal that benefited both of us since my other investments frequently needed high-end photography. I became a silent partner in the catering company, providing the capital they needed to stabilize while taking a 30% stake in their rapidly growing business. And Millbrook Manor? I made the Harrisons an offer they couldn't refuse. Not to buy them out completely, but to become their majority investor, to provide the capital they needed to renovate and expand while keeping the family involved in day-to-day operations. They kept their legacy. I got control. By the time Vanessa's wedding day arrived, I owned or had significant stakes in every vendor, every supplier, every single element that would make her day perfect. And she had no idea. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at Millbrook Manor at 6 a.m., wearing a simple black dress that could pass for staff attire and carrying a clipboard that had become my signature accessory over the past months. Helena had specifically requested that I blend into the background so as not to distract from Vanessa's special day. If she only knew how much background I had purchased. The day unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch. Flowers were arranged, exactly as planned, each bloom perfect and positioned to catch the light at just the right angle. The photographer captured every moment with the skill that had made him one of the most sought-after artists in his field. The catering staff moved like dancers, serving food that would be talked about at society gatherings for months to come. And I orchestrated it all from the shadows, wearing my invisibility like armor. At 3 p.m., just 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I received a call that I had been expecting for weeks. Miss Whitfield? This is Janet Harrison from Millbrook Manor. I'm sorry to bother you on such short notice, but we have a rather urgent situation regarding the Blackwood-Whitfield wedding this afternoon. I stepped away from the bride's suite, where Vanessa was, having her makeup touched up for the 3rd time, and found a quiet corner near the service entrance. What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Harrison? Her voice was strained, embarrassed. It appears there's been an issue with the final payment. The credit card on file has been declined, and we're still missing nearly $40,000. Normally we would have caught this earlier, but with the holiday weekend and the bank delays, I'm afraid we can't proceed with the ceremony until the balance is settled. Through the window, I could see guests beginning to arrive. Elegant cars winding up the circular drive, women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits, all of them here to witness what was supposed to be the social event of the season. I see, I said. And you've spoken to the family about this? I tried calling Mr. Whitfield and Mrs. Whitfield several times this morning, but I keep getting voicemail. I'm at a complete loss. We can't legally hold the event without payment, but canceling now would be devastating, I finished. Yes, I can imagine. I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. Miss Whitfield, I know this is highly irregular, but given your involvement in coordinating the event, I was wondering if you might know how to reach them. Or perhaps... She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to suggest. Perhaps there's some other arrangement we could make? I hate to put you in this position, but... Mrs. Harrison, I said, cutting her off gently. I think there's something you should know. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not with the flourish this moment deserved, but with the calm professionalism that had gotten me this far. I told her about Betrayal Holdings, about my investments in her venue and every other vendor they were using. I told her about the real financial situation of my family, about the money they'd been spending that they didn't have, about the debts they'd been accruing in anticipation of a windfall from Trevor's family that was never going to come. And then I told her what I wanted her to do. At 4:30, just 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Mrs. Harrison made an announcement. The guests had all arrived and were seated in the garden, resplendent in their finery. Programs fanned against the unseasonably warm afternoon. The wedding party was assembled in the manor's grand foyer, Vanessa radiant in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Harrison said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "before we begin this beautiful ceremony, I have a special announcement regarding the venue." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't part of the program. As many of you know, Millbrook Manor has been in my family for 3 generations. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we've recently welcomed a new majority investor, someone who shares our commitment to preserving the manor's legacy while ensuring its future. Helena, standing near the back with the other parents, looked confused. This wasn't the time for business announcements. Our new partner has been instrumental in making today's celebration possible and has requested the opportunity to say a few words before we begin. The confusion on my family's faces was turning to something that looked like dread. They were starting to understand that something was happening, something outside their control, but they couldn't quite grasp what. I stepped forward, no longer carrying my clipboard, no longer dressed like staff. Somewhere between the morning setup and this moment, I had changed into a dress that had been hanging in my car. Nothing too flashy, but clearly expensive, clearly chosen by someone who understood the difference between cost and value. "Thanksy." "You, Mrs. Harrison," I said, accepting the microphone. "For those who don't know me, my name is Nora Whitfield." The recognition rippled through the crowd in whispers. Whitfield, the bride's sister. But why was she? "I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate my sister's wedding. Family is so important, isn't it? The bonds we share, the support we give each other, the way we show up for the people we love." My eyes found Helena in the crowd. Her face had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. Over the past 18 months, I've had the privilege of working closely with every vendor here today. The florists who created these stunning arrangements, the photographers capturing these precious memories, the caterers who will be serving you this evening. It's been fascinating to learn about their businesses, their challenges, their dreams. Vanessa, still standing with her bridesmaids near the manor's entrance, was starting to look genuinely frightened. She might not have understood the details, but she could sense the shift in power, the way the attention in the room was focusing on me instead of her. Many of you probably don't know that I work in technology and investments. It's not very glamorous, I'm afraid, not like planning weddings or painting watercolors, but it has its rewards. I paused, letting that settle. In the audience, I could see some of the family friends beginning to put pieces together. The Caldwells, who had known my family for decades, were looking at each other with dawning comprehension. Today's celebration is particularly special because it represents not just the union of 2 people, but the culmination of a business venture that's very close to my heart. You see, through my company, Varelli Holdings, I've become the majority owner of Millbrook Manor. I'm also the primary investor in Camden Point Florals, a partner in Brightwater Catering, and the person who made it possible for Morrison Photography to continue operating. The silence was so complete, I could hear a bird singing in the garden. In other words, I continued, my voice steady and clear, I own this wedding. Helena made a sound like a small animal in distress. My father, standing beside her, looked like he was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation with insufficient data. Now, I want to assure everyone that the ceremony will proceed exactly as planned. The contracts have all been honored, the services will be provided, and Vanessa will have the beautiful wedding she's dreamed of. That was never in question. Vanessa's maid of honor was whispering urgently in her ear, but my sister seemed frozen, unable to process what was happening. But I did want to take this opportunity to share something with all of you, something I've learned over the past few years about the difference between being valued and being useful. I looked directly at my family now, my voice carrying clearly, to the back of the garden where they stood. You see, for most of my life, I was told that I was the practical one, the reliable one, the one who handled the details while others focused on more important things. I was told this so often that I believed it was a limitation, a consolation prize for not being beautiful or charming or effortlessly gifted. A few people in the audience were nodding slightly. Every family has its dynamics, its designated roles, its quiet hierarchies, but practicality, it turns out, is a superpower. While others were focused on appearances, I was building something real. While others were spending money they didn't have on experiences they couldn't afford, I was creating wealth. While others were assuming I would always be there to solve their problems, I was solving problems they didn't even know existed. Trevor, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked like he was considering making a run for it. His family, seated in the front row of the garden, were having urgent whispered conversations behind their programs. The venue. You're sitting in? I saved it from bankruptcy. The flowers you're admiring? I provided the capital that kept that business from folding. The food you'll be eating tonight? I'm the silent partner who made it possible for a family business to survive. The worst economic downturn in their history. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, messages being sent. By tomorrow, this story would be all over social media, shared in private groups and whispered about at country club lunches. So yes, I am the practical one. I am the reliable one. I am the one who handles the details. But I'm also the one who owns everything you see around you, who employs most of the people serving you today, and who could buy and sell this entire gathering without checking my account balance. The power in that statement wasn't just financial. It was the power of revelation, of showing people that their assumptions about the world might be completely wrong. Vanessa, I said, turning to address my sister directly for the first time. You asked me to be your maid at this wedding, to blend into the background, to handle the practical things while you focused on being beautiful. And I said yes, because that's what family does, isn't it? We show up for each other. Tears were starting to run down her face, ruining the makeup that had taken 2 hours to perfect. But I want you to know that I'm not your maid today. I'm not your servant, or your safety net, or your solution to problems you create for yourself. Today, I'm your host. This is my house. These are my employees. And this is my gift to you. I handed the microphone back to Mrs. Harrison and walked toward the manor's entrance, past my sister who was still standing frozen in her wedding gown. The ceremony will begin in 15 minutes, I announced as I passed. I suggest you decide whether you're ready to be married, because the photographer's time is expensive, and I'd hate to waste the investment. Inside the manor, I made my way to the owner's suite, my suite now, and sat down in the antique chair by the window that overlooked the garden. I could hear voices rising and falling, urgent conversations, people trying to make sense of what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Helena. We need to talk, now. I turned the phone face down and poured myself a glass of champagne, from the bottle that had been waiting in the suite. Through the window, I could see my family huddled together near the back of the garden, their body language screaming crisis mode. Guests were talking animatedly, some looking scandalized, others looking impressed. The photographer was still setting up, professional enough to continue working regardless of family drama. After about 10 minutes, there was a soft knock on the door. Come in, I called. It was Vanessa, still in her wedding dress but now accompanied by Trevor and both sets of parents. Helena looked like she was about to explode. My father looked exhausted. Trevor's parents looked like they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about their son's bride's family. What the hell? Do you think you're doing? Helena demanded before anyone else could speak. I took another sip of champagne. I'm attending my sister's wedding. Weren't you the one who insisted family was so important? You humiliated us in front of everyone we know, she continued, her voice shaking with rage. You made us look like you don't have any money, I finished. Helena, you don't have any money. You haven't had money for years. You've been living off credit, equity loans, and the hope that someone else would solve your problems. My father finally found his voice. Nora, we had no idea about your success. If you had just told us. Told you what, Dad? That I had money? So you could ask me for more of it? So you could treat me like a walking ATM instead of like the help? Trevor cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until what? I asked. Until you can figure out whether my sister is worth marrying now that you know her family dynamics? Don't worry, Trevor. The money's already spent. The contracts are already signed. Your trust fund is safe. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice small and broken. Why are you doing this to me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why was I doing this? For revenge? For justice? For the satisfaction of watching people who had underestimated me finally see what I was capable of? I'm not doing anything to you, Vanessa. I'm doing something for you. I'm giving you the wedding you wanted, in the venue you chose, with the vendors you selected. Every detail is exactly as you planned it. But you ruined it, she whispered. Everyone will remember this instead of the ceremony. Will they? Or will they remember the day they learned that quiet, practical Nora Whitfield was actually more successful than everyone in this room combined? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the guests who were still milling around in the garden. Some were leaving, probably the ones who were only there for the social cachet and had no real loyalty to our family. But most were staying, curious to see how this would play out. You have a choice to make, I said without turning around. You can stand here arguing about what just happened, or you can go get married. The sun is starting to set. The photographer is getting impatient, and there are 200 people in my garden waiting to see whether you're brave enough to follow through. I turned back to face them. But understand this. If you choose to go through with it, you're not just marrying Trevor. You're accepting that the dynamic in this family has fundamentally changed. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not your solution to financial problems. I'm not your maid. Helena opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop. Her. I'm your sister, your daughter, your family member. But I'm also someone who built an empire while you were assuming I was barely scraping by. I'm someone who could have let this wedding collapse into chaos, but chose to make it perfect instead. I'm someone who deserves your respect, not your pity or your condescension. The room was silent, except for the sound of music drifting up from the garden, where the string quartet was playing while they waited for the ceremony to begin. So what's it going to be? I asked. Trevor's mother, a woman I had met exactly twice, and who had clearly been briefed to think of our family as slightly beneath theirs, stepped forward. I think, she said carefully, that this young woman has shown remarkable grace under very trying circumstances. And I think Vanessa is very fortunate to have a sister who would go to such lengths to ensure her happiness. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that the power structure they thought they understood had shifted completely. My father nodded slowly. You're right, Nora. We owe you more than an apology. I don't want an apology, I said. I want things to be different. Vanessa looked at me with eyes that were no longer the confident, dismissive eyes of someone who assumed she would always be the center of attention. Will you still be my maid of honor? She asked quietly. I smiled, the first genuine smile I had given any of them in months. No, I said. But I'll be your sister, if you want me to be. The ceremony was beautiful. Vanessa walked down the aisle in her perfect dress, carrying flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent, toward a man who may have been marrying her for the wrong reasons, but who seemed genuinely relieved that the drama was over. The photographer captured every moment with the skill I had paid so dearly to secure. The guests ate food that would be talked about for years and danced to music that transformed the garden into something magical. And I sat in the front row, not as the maid or the coordinator or the problem solver, but as the sister of the bride and the owner of everything around us. During the reception, people approached me differently, not with the polite dismissal I was used to, but with genuine curiosity, even admiration. Several offered business opportunities. A few asked for investment advice. One elderly woman, a family friend I had known since childhood, pulled me aside and said, "I always knew there was more to you than they gave you credit for." Helena found me near the end of the evening, after most of the guests had gone home and the staff was beginning to clean up. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice subdued in a way I had never heard before. "Go ahead. How long have you had this kind of money?" "A while," I said. "And you never told us because—" I considered the question, really considered it. "Because you never asked who I was. You only cared about what I could do for you." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the caterers pack up the remains of the dessert station. "I think I've been a terrible mother to you," she said finally. "You've been a mother who played favorites," I corrected. "That's not the same thing as terrible, but it's not the same thing as good either. Can you forgive me?" The question surprised me. In all my planning, all my preparation for this moment, I hadn't expected genuine remorse. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to find out." As I drove home that night, still wearing my expensive dress and carrying a bottle of champagne from the reception, I reflected on what had actually happened. I had humiliated my family in front of their entire social circle. I had revealed secrets that would probably damage relationships and definitely change how people saw us. I had used my wealth as a weapon in a way that was probably petty and definitely calculated. And I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had finally shown them who I really was. Not the practical one, or the reliable one, or the one who handled details. Just Nora. Successful, powerful, wealthy Nora who had built something extraordinary while they were looking the other way. 6 months later, I told the story on a podcast called Revenge Treats, not because I was proud of the humiliation aspect, but because I thought there might be other people out there who were tired of being underestimated, tired of being taken for granted, tired of being treated like supporting characters in other people's stories. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages from people who had felt invisible in their own families, overlooked at their jobs, dismissed by people who should have valued them. People who had built their own empires in secret, who had their own reveal moments, who had learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's success so complete that it reframes everything. Vanessa and I talk now. Not often, and not about anything deep, but we talk. She's learning to live within her means, which is a challenge when your means are significantly more limited than you thought they were. Trevor stayed, though I suspect their marriage will require more work than either of them anticipated. Helena is seeing a therapist, trying to understand why she treated her children so differently, why she was so threatened by potential she couldn't see. My father and I have dinner once a month. We're learning to be family members instead of strangers who share a last name. And me? I'm learning something I never expected. That being seen is more satisfying than being successful, and being respected is more valuable than being feared. But the penthouse overlooking Camden Point's harbor doesn't hurt either. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the practical one, the one who handles things while other people shine, know that your time might be coming. Keep building. Keep growing. Keep becoming the person you're meant to be. And if you have a story like mine, I'd love to hear it. share it in the comments below. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay invisible. What's your story of being underestimated? Have you ever had a moment where you got to show people who you really were? Share your experiences in the comments. We're all in this together.